Black man humiliated by CEO. His next move shocks the entire industry. It only took a few seconds. A packed ballroom, cameras flashing. The CEO of one of the world's biggest companies smiling wide as he welcomed his new partner on stage. The new partner, a black man dressed in a simple charcoal suit, extended his hand. Calm, respectful. The CEO looked right at him, and then turned away. He adjusted the microphone instead, laughed a little, acted like nothing had happened. But it had. Dozens of phones caught the moment. The hand left hanging in midair. The silent message sent without a single word. By the time the sun had set, the video had gone viral, and by the next morning, the man who was humiliated had already made his first move. This is not a story about a handshake. This is about power, and what happens when the one who's underestimated is also the one holding all the cards. The room was filled with people who believed they mattered. CEOs, investors, influencers, all dressed in their sharpest suits and most practiced smiles. This was the event of the year, where deals were made and futures were decided. No one noticed when he walked in. No flashy entrance. No team. Just one man, calm and quiet, with eyes that didn't miss a thing. His name wasn't on billboards or magazine covers, but his influence stretched across continents. Real power doesn't shout. It doesn't need to. The CEO, on the other hand, was born for the spotlight. Silver hair, designer suit, and a voice trained to make people believe in big promises. He stood on stage, talking about change, about innovation, about diversity. The audience nodded along, not really listening, but loving how it sounded. Then came the announcement. We're proud to welcome a new partner, a man whose financial brilliance has shaped markets around the globe. Applause filled the room as the black man stepped forward, the cameras turning to capture the moment. He reached out his hand. The CEO paused, just for a second, then turned away to adjust the mic stand. The handshake never happened. The applause slowed, unsure now. But the man didn't react. His face didn't change. He simply lowered his hand and stepped back. Most people in the room missed it, or told themselves it was nothing, just a mix-up. But the camera didn't miss it. And social media didn't either. That video clip, just a few seconds long, was played, shared, and analyzed millions of times. Some called it an accident. Others called it exactly what it was. Online, people were angry. In interviews, the CEO brushed it off. These things get blown out of proportion, he said. But behind closed doors, he was already on edge. Because the man he ignored didn't speak out. He didn't post anything. He didn't give interviews. Instead, he made a call. Just one. And that was all it took to start something that would shake the entire industry. The truth was, this wasn't a new fight. It had been building for years, long before the lights, the cameras, or the stage, long before this man was a billionaire investor. He was just a boy sitting in a courtroom, watching his father being sent away for a crime he didn't commit. That day, something inside him changed, and now, decades later, he had a chance to change everything. This wasn't about ego. It wasn't about getting even. It was about showing the world that real justice doesn't always show up in courtrooms. Sometimes it walks quietly into a room full of power and leaves holding all of it. And the CEO who refused his handshake, he was about to learn exactly who he'd tried to dismiss. The game had already started, and he was 3 moves behind. After the video went viral, the world talked, but he didn't. No tweets, no press, no emotional reaction. While social media boiled with rage and influencers made reaction videos dissecting every frame of the handshake snub, he stayed silent, calm, still. The silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy, because while the CEO and his team scrambled to put out PR fires, he was already in motion. The first call he made wasn't to a lawyer or a news outlet. It was to someone he trusted, someone who'd been waiting for this moment as long as he had. "It's time," he said. Nothing more. Across the city, a man in a small windowless office ended a call, packed up a folder that had been untouched for nearly a decade, and began making his own moves. In a corner apartment lit only by the glow of streetlights, a woman checked her phone and saw the text. "We begin at sunrise. No turning back." They weren't random. These were people he'd spent years building quiet relationships with. Some were insiders at the CEO's company. Others were outside, watching and waiting. None of them had been chosen for convenience. They were chosen because they had something to lose and something to fight for. At the same time, inside the CEO's company, panic was setting in. "What's the plan?" asked the head of PR, pacing across the office. "It was a misunderstanding," the CEO insisted, pouring another drink. "People will move on. They always do." His assistant wasn't so sure. "Sir, the clip has over 40 million views. Trending. In 12 countries. People aren't moving on." The CEO rolled his eyes. "Then we give them a statement. Apologize if they want one. Say we value diversity. The usual." He didn't see what everyone else was starting to. This wasn't just a viral moment. It was a spark. The clip had hit a nerve because it wasn't just about one handshake. It was about every time someone had been made to feel invisible, overlooked, uninvited, despite being more than qualified. And this time, the man being humiliated wasn't powerless. He was one of the wealthiest private investors in the world. By design, not accident. He had deliberately stayed out of the spotlight, never took interviews, never courted headlines. His name didn't show up in lifestyle magazines or award shows, but his money? It moved through 5 continents. His influence was deep, quiet, precise. He liked it that way. Silent power made people underestimate you, and being underestimated had always been his greatest weapon. As the CEO polished his image in the press, the first blow landed. A small but crucial software company, one that provided internal logistics to the CEO's entire global operations, was suddenly acquired, privately, quietly, in cash. By morning, the software company's ownership changed, and now, the man who'd been dismissed on stage controlled the heartbeat of the CEO's supply chain. No announcement was made. The CEO only found out when someone from operations said, "We can't get in touch with our vendor. Something's changed." At first, he laughed it off. "It's probably nothing. Just a buyout." Then the phone calls started. Legal issues, licensing delays, threats of system disruptions. And that's when he knew. The man he humiliated hadn't just come to the table as a partner. He'd come with a plan. Elsewhere, in a quiet cafe, the woman who had first introduced them sat alone at a table, stirring her coffee with a shaking hand. She had risked her career bringing the deal together. She'd believed it could lead to something real. Now she was being shut out of meetings. Her company ID didn't work in certain elevators. Emails stopped coming to her inbox. She wasn't being fired, not yet, but she was being erased. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Stay steady. You're not alone." She didn't reply. She didn't need to. She knew exactly who had sent it, and she knew what it meant. The pieces were moving, not in anger, not in chaos, but in total, silent control. And the man at the center of it all? He wasn't looking for revenge. He was building a reckoning, one that had been planned long before that handshake. What the CEO didn't know was that his worst mistake wasn't what he did in front of the cameras. It was what he did behind closed doors. And now, all of it was about to come into the light. 3 days had passed since the summit, and everything still looked the same. Employees still showed up in their expensive suits. The building still gleamed. The stock ticker still ran across the screen in the lobby. But if you looked closer, something had shifted. It was in the way people talked in hushed voices now, heads tilted slightly, eyes checking behind them. The way department heads canceled meetings without explanations. The way no one seemed to know who was actually in charge anymore. The CEO could feel it too. For the first time in his long career, he wasn't in control of the story. And that terrified him more than any headline. He tried to carry on, held meetings, smiled for the cameras. But his staff could tell. His voice was too sharp, his temper too quick, his charm wearing thin. Meanwhile, the man he'd dismissed was still nowhere to be seen. No statements, no interviews, no comment. That silence was driving the CEO mad. "He's playing a long game," he told his PR chief during a closed-door meeting. "But so am I. I've survived worse than this." But this wasn't like anything he'd faced before, because the man behind the silence hadn't come to play games. He'd come to end one. Behind the scenes, more quiet moves were underway. Lawyers were pulling public records, shell companies were being traced. Shareholders were getting calls, polite conversations, generous offers, and well-timed buyouts. One by one, tiny pressure points inside the CEO's empire were being pressed. And from the outside, it still looked like everything was fine. That was the beauty of it. It wasn't a loud takedown, it was erosion. Slow, quiet, devastating. At the same time, inside the company, something else began to happen. A young woman in the finance department noticed that a familiar name had disappeared from a shared project folder. A senior analyst she often collaborated with. Gone. No announcement. No goodbye. She asked around. No one had answers. Later that day, she got a text. "Be careful who you're seen talking to." That night, at home, she deleted every old email thread she had that mentioned the man from the summit. Just in case, people weren't being fired yet. But the walls were moving. Access cards started to fail. Longtime staff stopped getting invites to meetings they once led. And nobody was saying a word about it. Fear does that. Meanwhile, the woman, who had once fought hard to bring the man and the CEO together, was now stuck in a strange in-between space. Too visible to be let go, too loyal to be trusted. She knew she was being watched. Every hallway conversation she had, every document she accessed, every time she opened her phone, she could feel it. Still, she stayed calm, didn't flinch, didn't show emotion. That was what they wanted, to make her crack, but she didn't. What they didn't know was that she had already started building her own quiet plan. One encrypted folder, one external drive, one growing file of truths they thought were buried. She hadn't sent anything. Yet. But she would. When it mattered, and she wasn't the only one. Across town, the CEO's own daughter was beginning to see things she hadn't wanted to see. As head of the company's Green Initiatives, a division that was more PR than policy, she had always played her role, smiled at events, read from prepared scripts. But in private, she had begun opening the numbers herself. And what she found made her stomach drop. Their claims of carbon neutrality? False. Their promises to support minority-led startups? Empty. And worse, she started finding patterns. Companies acquired and then dissolved. Founders pushed out, projects shut down. It wasn't just shady, it was systematic. She confronted her father once, cautiously. He brushed it off. It's just how the game is played, but it didn't feel like a game anymore. Not to her. Now she sat in her apartment, surrounded by open files and half-drunk cups of coffee, wondering how many other lies she'd helped protect, just by staying quiet. Then her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Only 4 words. You know the truth. She stared at the screen for a long time and replied, "Yes." Back at headquarters, the CEO was preparing for what he thought would be his comeback. A carefully crafted press statement, an announcement of new diversity, hires, a planned event with friendly media. He believed it would work. But that's because he still didn't understand who he was dealing with. This wasn't about a media storm. It wasn't about bad optics. It was about consequences. And they were already on the way. Because when the man who was humiliated left that stage, he didn't just walk away from a handshake. He walked toward the fall of an empire. One deal at a time. One ally at a time. One truth at a time. And soon, the CEO would realize the cracks weren't coming from outside. They were already deep within the walls. It started with a name change. A small software company, known mostly to industry insiders, suddenly updated its website. New leadership, new direction, new vision. What the CEO didn't know yet was that this new vision came directly from the man he had dismissed on stage just days earlier. The same man who'd stood in front of the world, offered his hand, and been humiliated. Now, he controlled the technology backbone that powered nearly 60% of the CEO's global logistics. Everything from shipments to real-time inventory. No press release. No dramatic announcement. Just a quiet takeover. And that's what made it terrifying. The CEO found out the way most powerful men learn bad news, through someone lower on the food chain. One of his operations managers knocked on his door during lunch. "Sir, the Neurotech system? It's responding slower than usual. Some of our orders are stuck in the queue." "So call them," the CEO snapped, chewing. "We have contracts." The manager hesitated. "That's the thing. There's no one to call. It's been acquired. Privately, they're not responding to our requests." The CEO blinked. "Acquired by who?" No answer. Later that night, he found out. A late-night email from legal. Confirmed. 51% stake in Neurotech acquired by a private group connected to Darius Langston Holdings. The name hit him like a punch to the ribs. He remembered that face. The calm, the stillness, the outstretched hand. And now, this? No, the CEO muttered, slamming his laptop shut. Not him. He doesn't get to win. But it wasn't about winning. Not for Darius. It was about exposing the truth. And this was only the beginning. The next morning, things got worse. An anonymous tip reached regulators. Potential discrepancies in the company's environmental reporting. The very numbers they had used to promote themselves as a green corporation were now under scrutiny. Inspections were scheduled. Documents were requested. Suddenly, the CEO's sustainability division wasn't just for show anymore. It was a crime scene in progress. And the person who had once helped him sell that image? His daughter. She sat in her office, staring at files she herself had helped prepare. She had adjusted the language, removed sensitive figures, hidden inconvenient truths. Back then, she told herself it was harmless. Now, she wasn't so sure. Her phone rang. It was her father. "I need you to clean this up," he said, tone sharp. "How?" she asked softly. "You know the reports better than anyone. Fix them." She didn't answer right away. "I don't think I can," she finally said. "You can," he snapped. "And you will. This isn't just about you. This is our name." That word, our, echoed in her ears long after the call ended. Meanwhile, Naomi, the executive who had brought Darius to the table in the first place, was trying to stay invisible. Ever since the summit, she'd been slowly cut out. At first, she thought it was paranoia. Then her name disappeared from the company's leadership webpage. Then her office key stopped working. Then her assistant was reassigned. She wasn't fired. Not directly, she was being erased, piece by piece, and still, she said nothing. But silence didn't mean surrender. Late at night, she scanned years of internal documents she had quietly saved. Emails, proposals, internal memos, all pointing to one thing. The company had built an empire on broken promises, especially to people who looked like her, especially to founders who looked like Darius. She reached out to a reporter she trusted, just one. No leaks, no drama, just facts. "This isn't revenge," she told the journalist. "It's the truth, and it's time someone said it out loud." By the end of the week, the CEO's team was in panic mode. They were losing control of the story, the staff, and the systems. Internal departments weren't communicating. Investors were calling. And then came the video, a leaked clip, originally shot by a junior employee, showed the moment of the summit handshake in slow motion, frame by frame, paused just long enough to show the CEO's eyes flick to the extended hand, and then turn away. There was no way to explain it now. It wasn't a missed moment. It was a choice. The video spread fast. The headlines followed. Refused, ignored, then dismantled. One man's silent revenge. When humility meets power. The CEO still believed he could fix it. He scheduled a press conference, had his team prepare a statement, something about miscommunication and unfortunate timing. But deep down, even he felt it. The ground was moving. He had built his world on image, intimidation, and money. Now, the image was cracked. The fear was fading. And the money? The money was moving to someone else. Somewhere far from cameras and offices, Darius sat in a modest workspace, staring at a board filled with photographs, documents, and timelines. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just nodded. "Phase 1, he said to the man beside him. "Complete." By now, the story had spread far beyond business headlines. It was no longer about stocks or speeches. It was about something personal, something people could feel, even if they didn't know all the names. They saw it in the handshake that didn't happen. They saw it in the silence that followed, and they were waiting for what came next. But inside Stroud's headquarters, waiting had turned into watching. Everyone was on edge. Nobody trusted anyone, and at the center of it all, the CEO. For the first time in his career, he couldn't predict what was coming. He tried to act like everything was fine, still wore the expensive suits, still barked orders in boardrooms, still made calls to reporters like they owed him coverage. But even his voice had changed, tighter, less certain, like he could hear the walls creaking around him. Then came the first crack. A junior compliance officer, someone who had only been with the company for 2 years, sent an anonymous file to a financial journalist. It wasn't flashy. No dramatic leak, just a simple spreadsheet, dates, project names, internal approvals. And next to each, a quiet cancellation, followed by silent budget cuts, all targeting companies led by women, by Black founders, by indigenous scientists, one after another. Promised funding, gone. The journalist verified everything. The next morning, an article hit the front page of a major news site. A pattern of disappearance, how Stroud silenced minority innovation. It shook the industry, but it didn't surprise Darius. He'd seen it, lived it. That was why he never played the game by their rules, because their rules were never made for people like him. The article rattled Stroud's executive floor. Panic set in. Internal emails were flying, legal advisors were pulled into emergency meetings, and staff were told not to speak to media. The CEO's answer? He fired the junior officer. Quick, clean, loud enough to send a message. But it was the wrong move. Because now, people were watching. And when a second employee stepped forward, this time from HR, with documents showing how whistleblowers were tracked and silenced, it was too late to contain the fire. The news got out. The world was watching now. Naomi had been quiet since the summit. Too quiet. People assumed she'd backed down, that she was trying to protect her position. But behind the scenes, She'd been working every night from a rented office space outside company walls, cross-referencing internal files, connecting dots, reaching out to every former employee she remembered getting pushed out without reason. And now, with 2 brave whistleblowers out in the open, she knew it was time. She made one call. "Tell them I'm ready," she said, say. Next night, she sat across from a primetime investigative journalist, the city skyline glowing behind them, cameras rolling, no makeup artist, no pre-written script, just Naomi in her own words. "For years," she said, voice steady, "I believed I could fix things from the inside. I thought if I worked twice as hard, followed every rule, and never made waves, I could build something real." She paused. But this company was never interested in real change. It only wanted the appearance of it. "I brought someone in who could have changed everything. And what happened?" She didn't have to say it. Everyone watching already knew. The CEO watched. The interview from his home office, drink in hand. "She's trying to destroy us," he muttered. "No," came a voice from the doorway. He turned. It was his daughter. "She's trying to fix what you broke." The silence stretched. "You're either with me," he said finally, "or you're with them." "I'm with the truth," she said softly. "You should try it sometime." She left without waiting for a response. The next morning, another shock hit the company. A long-trusted board member, quiet, loyal, predictable, resigned suddenly. No warning, no statement, just a resignation letter. And a link to a private folder shared with government investigators. Inside, financial statements, secret internal memos, private communications. The boardroom froze. All eyes turned to the CEO. He stood at the head of the table, silent, stiff. Then, in a low voice, "I want names. Anyone working with Langston, I want them out." But they all knew. It was already too late, because Darius wasn't forcing his way in. He was letting the system collapse from the inside. He hadn't built a team of warriors. He'd built a movement, one that no press release could stop, one that no firing could silence. And somewhere in a quiet townhouse, Darius stood alone at his window, watching rain tap against the glass. He held a folder in one hand. It was old, worn, but clean. The words Project Phoenix etched across the front. Inside were the final pieces, the stories no one had dared tell, the evidence no one had dared show. But soon they would. And when that day came, it wouldn't be about one man's fall. It would be about something bigger, the end of an era, the start of a new one. The boardroom didn't feel powerful anymore. It used to hum with confidence, with certainty, with legacy. Now it felt like a waiting room before a storm. 12 board members sat around the table, some angry, some scared, a few pretending they weren't either. At the head was the CEO. He wasn't smiling, not this time. Screens around the room were frozen on one paused frame, Naomi Clark's interview, playing on every financial network in the country. They all watched it. They all heard her say it. This wasn't an accident. It was a pattern. And we all knew it. The CEO tried to speak, but Richard, the longest-serving board member, raised a hand. "We've got a bigger problem now," he said quietly. "The SEC is involved. Again." A folder slid across the table. It contained internal communications, whistleblower transcripts, proof of doctored environmental reports. "All signed under your name," Richard added, looking straight at him. The CEO didn't respond. What could he say? That he didn't know? That he didn't mean it? That he didn't shake the man's hand because he was distracted? He'd used all those excuses already. Nobody was buying them anymore. Meanwhile, across town, Darius Langston wasn't celebrating. He wasn't smiling either. He was focused. He knew better than anyone. Power doesn't disappear. It just changes hands. If you're not careful, it turns you into the very thing you tried to destroy. So he stayed grounded. He checked every file, every line of data, every account that once belonged to Stroud. He didn't want to just take it down. He wanted to transform it, and that meant doing it the hard way, the honest way, the long way. Back at Stroud headquarters, things were crumbling in real time. First came the stock drop. Rumors of criminal investigations sent the company's value plummeting. Nearly $1.2 billion lost in 2 days. Then came the headlines. Stroud Empire implodes amid scandal. From icon to liability, the fall of a CEO. Langston holds the leverage now, and then came the final press conference. The CEO stood behind a row of microphones, lights flashing, reporters shouting. He still wore the suit, still used the same practiced tone, but his eyes looked different now, like he finally understood something he should have known from the start. "I've been the subject of unfair attacks," he said. "There's a coordinated attempt to destroy my life's work. Cameras clicked, pens scratched paper, phones recorded. I never meant to disrespect anyone. If my actions were misunderstood, I apologize." But even as he spoke the words, he looked away from the cameras, away from the crowd, because he knew. It wasn't misunderstood. It was seen, clearly. A moment that told a bigger truth. And now, that truth had a price. By that evening, another bombshell dropped. Harper Stroud, his daughter, had just released a personal statement. In it, she confirmed the company's pattern of lies, its manipulation of data, the way it had destroyed small startups behind closed doors, and then she wrote something nobody expected. "My mother didn't die in a car crash. She died from the consequences of losing everything my father took from her." Her words shattered whatever support the CEO had left. Investors pulled out. Legal teams resigned. Public support vanished overnight. And the man who once sat at the top? He was now just a headline. Back in the same ballroom where the handshake had been refused, a new event was taking place. Only this time, it wasn't the CEO at the podium. It was Naomi. She stood in front of a smaller crowd, former employees, community leaders, partners who still believed in change. "This company doesn't need a new logo," she said. "It needs a new soul." Behind her, the old banners had been removed. In their place was a single screen that read, "Rebuilding, not rebranding." The message was clear. This wasn't about fixing PR. This was about doing things differently. Naomi announced a plan for full transparency, real diversity audits, community ownership stakes, clean technology funded by reinvested profits. And Darius? He stood in the back, watching silently. Not because he needed credit, but because this was never just about him. It was about every person who had been dismissed, overlooked, ignored. It was about making sure it didn't happen again. The next morning, federal agents arrived at the CEO's penthouse. Quiet, professional, no drama. They presented the warrant. He didn't argue. He didn't shout. He just stood there, looking out the window at a city that no longer belonged to him. He was escorted out the front door. Cameras caught the moment. The same man who once walked red carpets, who once commanded applause with every speech, now walked into the back of a government car, silent. And the handcuffs? They weren't just metal. They were truth. The kind he had avoided for decades, now finally catching up. In a private meeting room days later, Darius sat with Naomi and Harper. No suits, no cameras, just 3 people who'd lived the damage and now held the pieces. "There's something you need to see," Harper said, sliding a flash drive across the table. It contained the final piece of evidence, emails between her father and the judge who sent Darius's father to prison. A 27-year-old secret, a quiet deal that changed Darius's life forever. He looked at the screen, then closed the laptop. "I already knew," he said. "You knew?" Harper whispered. "I just didn't have proof, until now." Naomi leaned in. "What will you do with it?" He looked at both of them. "Nothing. Not yet." They waited. Because this isn't about punishment anymore. It's about building what comes next. 6 months had passed since the fall. The building still stood, but the name above its doors had changed. What once read Stroud Global now simply read Langston Clark Initiatives. No marble plaques, no glowing logos, just clean lines and clear intentions. Inside, things looked different too. No more corner offices with frosted glass, no more walls lined with ego. The desks were open. People talked like equals again, not like they were being watched. The company wasn't just being restructured, it was being rewritten, and at the heart of it all, 3 names that, not long ago, would have never appeared on the same page. Naomi Clark, the new CEO, once silenced, now the voice guiding a new corporate language rooted in transparency. Harper Stroud, now Chief Ethics Officer, a daughter who had once been blind to her father's legacy, now determined to undo the harm his name had caused. And Darius Langston, strategic advisor and silent force, a man who had carried generational pain and chose to turn it into progress. The press had moved on. The world always did. There were newer scandals, fresh distractions. But the impact of what had happened was still echoing in boardrooms, classrooms, and courtrooms across the country. Other companies were now asking uncomfortable questions. Other executives were wondering if the way they'd always done things would still be tolerated tomorrow. A quiet shift had begun, and not because someone shouted louder, but because someone stayed steady. One morning, in the same neighborhood where he'd grown up, Darius stood on the steps of a newly opened community innovation center. He was dressed in dark jeans and a soft jacket. No suit, no flash, just presence. Behind him, inside the glass building, young founders pitched their ideas to real investors, not just for charity, but for partnership, real capital, real belief. One girl, no older than 14, had designed a water filtration system using recycled street runoff. Her eyes lit up when a grant team offered to fund her next prototype. Another young man pitched a tech solution to support families dealing with eviction notices, built from his own family's story. These were the futures Darius had always believed in. Not startups for billionaires, but solutions from those who lived the problems. That was the mission now. Not profit alone, but purpose too. Inside the center, Naomi joined him. "3rd cohort this year," she said, smiling. "And we're already ahead of projections." He nodded, watching a small group of students gather near a 3D printer. "You ever think about what this could have looked like if things had gone another way?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. Then he said quietly, "All the time, but it didn't go another way. It went the only way it could." She looked at him. "You think justice was served?" "I think justice started," he said. "The rest is up to us." Later, that evening, Harper Stroud sat alone at a cafe not far from the courthouse where her father's trial was about to begin. She wore no disguise, no security. She just watched the people passing by, headphones in, grocery bags full, kids in strollers. They didn't know her story. They didn't know the guilt she carried or the grief, not just for the mother she lost, but for the version of herself that once believed power meant being feared. Her phone buzzed, a message from Darius. "You did the hard thing. That's where real change starts." She stared at it for a moment, then typed, "Still feels like not enough." His reply came instantly. "That's how you know it's real." The courtroom the next day was tense. Griffin Stroud sat at the defense table. He looked smaller now, thinner, not just in body, but in presence. No entourage, no publicist, just a man stripped of his armor. The charges were read: securities fraud, obstruction, conspiracy, judicial corruption, one by one. The judge, not the one from Darius's childhood, but one who had once interned in that very court, looked over his glasses and asked simply, "How do you plead, Griffin?" Hesitated. Not for drama, for fear. He finally spoke. "Guilty? To all counts." No outburst followed. No cameras were allowed inside. Just a quiet gavel. A set date for sentencing. And with that, the past closed a door on itself. Outside the courthouse, Darius didn't speak to reporters. Instead, he walked across the street and stood near the same spot where he had watched his father walk out of. This very building in handcuffs, so much had changed. And still, some pain would always live in the echoes. But pain wasn't the ending. This was, or maybe, the beginning. 2 weeks later, at a summit on ethical business, Naomi took the stage for the first time. "I'm not here to promise we'll be perfect," she said. "But I can promise we'll be honest, and that we will never again let the way it's always been done be a reason for doing the wrong thing." Applause followed, not thunderous, but real. Sincere. Next to her, Darius nodded. Once he wasn't a man who smiled easily, but this time, he did, a little. In the final scene, the camera would have shown the three of them, Darius, Naomi, Harper, walking through the lobby of the new company. No plaques, no portraits, no power games, just people, just work, just purpose. And maybe, just maybe, something like justice.